Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Well, last week I got back from a trip to Utah, so I had a chance to speak out there at the Wildlife Damage Management Conference. And so overall, it's actually gorgeous up there in Logan, Utah. So I hope your time is going well, as many of you, I'm sure, are gearing up for the heavy spring season. So we're a little late up here in Montana. Of course, we're at 3,000 feet elevation here. So some of you, of course, are a lot more warmer, and of course, we're in a northern latitude here in the northern part of the United States. So we still have some snow on the ground, but we're starting to see some grass peek up through. So we need the moisture, so we'll take that because fire season will be here before we know it. Do take a few moments, if you would be so kind, and to subscribe to the channel. Of course, ring the bell, and if you could give us a little bit of a review on our channel, we would be most grateful for that, especially if it's a 5-star review. Also, if you don't like dealing with YouTube, you can find my podcast over at Rumble. Just go to Rumble and then look up Wildlife Control Consultant on that Rumble site, and my podcast will show up there. If you'd like to reach out to me, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from your thoughts, comments, suggestions for new shows, even criticisms. Yeah, even criticism, we'll take those as well. If you know of guests that would be interested in me on the show, I'm always looking for new guests. It's kind of a strange phenomenon. I've mentioned this multiple times. How many people are afraid to be on the show? And I find it quite fascinating. So if any of you have insights as to why people are afraid to be on the podcast, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. It's strange in terms of free marketing. I haven't quite figured that out. But nevertheless, we're grateful for those who are willing to come onto the show, and some even willing to come on a second time. So most people seem to have a good time after they're finished, and there's so much information out there that's not getting to the public and to you as professionals, because our audience is primarily professionals, but those of you that aren't, you're welcome as well. Whew. All right, so I saw a book on Facebook that a person was commenting on, and that book title is, if I can hold it up here, Modern Mole Trapping by a gentleman named Richard Huberty. I hope I'm spelling his name correctly. He's a gentleman that grew up in Dyersville, Iowa, and ultimately moved to Minnesota. And after he kind of retired from his regular job, I guess he really wanted to move into mole trapping, and so ultimately he's written a book. So let me look that up for you here on Amazon, and you can certainly purchase this book. The full title of the book is Modern Mole Trapping, Addressing the Destructive Nature of Moles. It's in paperback. It was published in January 26th of this year, and you can purchase a copy for $28.95. That would be post-paid for most of you. It's about what I paid, $28.95 post-paid. The book is, let's see here. It's 113 pages, and so it's your traditional paperback size. So you're probably looking at something that's like a 6 by 8 type of size, and so it's a fairly quick read. Images are all black and white, and many of them are kind of in a line drawing, shading type situation. I was a little surprised by that. I thought with the modern technology and the ability to use color, and regular photographs, I thought he would use that. You can always desaturate your color photographs to make them black and white, because obviously color printing is very expensive. Just look at my wildlife damage inspection handbook, and so there's a reason why it's over $70. Nevertheless, so some of the images are less clear than I would like. And I'm a little spicy. He has some wonderful line drawings in here, but some of the pictures that have sort of been desaturated and converted into sort of I don't even know how to describe it. They've sort of been desaturated and made into, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of, I don't know what to call it. It's a different design. I think there's a function in Photoshop where you can do that. So I was a little surprised that that was the case, rather than just a simple desaturation and converting them to black and white. So it's a very quick read. Let me go through the chapters here for you before I get into the guts of my review. So he has a preface. Of course, chapter 1 is all about moles. Chapter 2 is mole prevention. Chapter 3 is how to get rid of a mole. Chapter 4 is comparing mole traps. Chapter 5, let's simplify it. Chapter 6, common questions and tips. Chapter 7 is a video summary. Chapter 8, professional mole trappers. Chapter 9, suppliers and supplies. And then he ends it with a section about himself, a little biography information about himself. So what do I say about this particular book? Well, I'm always pleased when people are writing books. I think there's a tremendous need for books. Everyone thinks that everything's resolved by video and YouTube, and I don't believe that. I think if you do believe that, I would suggest that you're not thinking deeply enough about various topics. And so if you just want surface information, videos often are important. They play a valuable role because they're able to express certain information in certain ways. However, many times in a video, you're not able to get into some nuance because it would become prohibitively expensive to do all the things visually that you can do cheaper via Word. And also, I think there's a point of being able to access things faster in a book. I can often access things quickly in a book versus a video, particularly if the video is kind of long, because you have to kind of scroll for it. And so that can be a bit difficult. Nevertheless, glad to have information out there. Now, this book is not designed for wildlife control professionals. I want to be pretty clear about that. That doesn't mean it's not helpful and that there isn't information in there that can be useful for you. But if you're buying this book to sort of give you a system to help you make mole trapping profitable, I'm not sure this would be the book I would recommend first. Does that mean it can't be helpful for you? No, it can be. I believe that it's pretty rare for a book or video not to give you something. And this is the challenge that people have. Let me just take a little sidebar here. When we're talking about training, people will say, well, I don't need to go to this training. I don't learn anything new, blah, blah, blah. What they really mean by that is that they know enough about what they're doing that they're not finding that one kernel of gold that is going to revolutionize their business. And that's the challenge, especially as you become more experienced in your business. It gets harder and harder to refine and get that information that's going to give you that edge. Nevertheless, there is advantages with going to training, because sometimes what it does is it reinforces the fundamentals. That's important. But also that it takes a lot of work to mine through to get to that kernel. And I do think there are a few kernels in here that are going to be valuable, particularly for those of you that are involved in mole trapping as a part of your business. So in that sometimes you have to read things from a different perspective to help you reflect on your own work in practice. And you're not going to learn to do things differently unless you learn things from a different perspective. And you're not going to gain a competitive edge against your competitors, your other businesses that you're competing against, if you're doing exactly the same thing they're doing. So you have to sort of think outside the box, as a cliche, I know, but you need to think outside the box, and the way to do that sometimes is to be exposed to other information. So that is a general concept about training, that even if you don't, even if like, oh, I spent 60 minutes listening to this and I only learned one new thing. Well, that sometimes that one new thing made it work. When you think about $29, I think it's $28.95, so you paid $29 for this. Is that worth one fact or one tip? And I would suggest, generally speaking, yeah, it would be. Now you can say, well, but I've also spent all this time reading the book. Yep. But sometimes you're learning a different perspective, and you're reinforcing things, and you're being able to challenge yourself by seeing things from a different perspective. So you often gain at least one thing, and then of course the challenging. So that's a general idea in terms of what the value of education. You're listening to this podcast now as part of that challenge and looking at things from a different perspective. Okay, so I gave you a list of the chapters and how many pages it has. So now let's go into some of the pros of this particular book. So here's what I wrote down. He tries to be comprehensive. And so if you look through that table of contents again, he talks about mole prevention, talks a little about mole biology. He gets into a comparison of mole traps, and he interestingly gets into mole traps that aren't traditionally used by the industry. So he seems to be fascinated with the more European design, some of those scissor type traps from the European design. Now he does talk about the Gophinator, which is produced out of California, which is sort of a combination of the DK1 and the Maccabi. And there have been some good comments about that Gophinator trap, okay? So by Bill Knapp, I think, is the owner of the company out there. I think we've even had him on the show. So there have been, but he doesn't talk very much about the Gophinator trap. He really refers to some of these scissor traps that have been used, and that kind of came from Europe, and they've been Americanized a little bit. So he does talk about, again, damage identification, equipment, and various control methods. Unfortunately, what I didn't like was that he uses a lot of wiggle words. This may happen. This could happen. This, rather than being more definitive. I understand the desire to not overstate things, and I appreciate that. But I would have thought, for someone who is trapping as long as he has been, that he would have been able to been a little more definitive, or do the research necessary so that he could speak with some scientific authority. And so I think it was a little distracting at times. It's like, well, this may work, this may help. Well, if you're really, business owners need more than that. So this is one reason why it's just not really designed for business owners. And make sure that when you read it, you come to it with that perspective. He talks about developing a healthy lawn as a way of reducing, as a habitat modification for reducing mole problems. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. I would assume a healthy lawn would mean that, you're not having a lot of insects and grubs, but is too many worms a sign of an unhealthy lawn? I didn't understand that. So certainly, if you can reduce the amount of food in the lawn, you're going to have less impact from moles, because there's not going to be as much food for them to eat, and they're going to starve and move away. But he did say if you controlled some of these insects, sometimes the mole activity would actually increase because they're desperately searching for food. So I was a bit confused. I was a bit confused by that. For example, he said if you did grub control, it could cause more damage as they search for food. Well, if I guess I was puzzled. Well, so how does a healthy lawn actually help reduce mole activity? I didn't see where he got that from. He does delve into repellents and toxicants, and he does mention strychnine. And so he's correct that strychnine used to be used on moles, but I wasn't able to find any evidence whatsoever. And here's a site I visit. I go to the PPIS and NPERS, and I wasn't able to find any pesticide that uses strychnine that had moles listed. So it was a bit puzzling to me as to why you would talk about strychnine if there are no pesticides, at least none that I could find, that are listed that have moles on the label. So that was another thing kind of confusing for me. And so it's definitely listed for pocket gophers, but I'm not aware of any pesticide that is registered for the control of moles that uses strychnine as an active ingredient. So I thought it would have been better for him, particularly since this is going to homeowners primarily, that he should have said strychnine for moles is either illegal or perhaps provide the specific pesticide that is being used, that's used for moles. But I couldn't find it, but I can't swear, but I couldn't find it in my search. So that was a little confusing for me. He does review some of what I would call the quackery methods, and things like chewing gum, coffee grounds, cat litter. And he says that moles don't like coffee grounds, like the smell or the taste, but he didn't explain how he knew that. And that was disappointing to me because, you hear about a lot of these, I call them quackery techniques, where people are using chewing gum and, of course, the cat litter and coffee grounds. And well, how do they know? How do they know this stuff works? Who knows? Where did this idea come from? And when he said that moles don't like it, like coffee grounds, well, that's interesting information for me. How do you know that? Did you try it? So there wasn't a first person sort of approach, like I used this in 20 yards and I had these results. I know that's not necessarily scientific, but I do trust and I do take information that's anecdotal from professionals because sometimes it's the only information we have. Would I like, a controlled study that's done under scientific conditions with accurate record keeping and all this? Yeah, who wouldn't? But we all know that's expensive. We all know that our industry, unfortunately, refuses to fund research. So the only thing we have is the anecdotal stories from professionals, and professionals who have years of experience with a certain species often have really good quality information. It may not be publishable in a peer-reviewed journal, but gosh darn it, it's amazing. And I learned this from reading about a trapper who's his name escapes me unfortunately at the moment, but he wrote books on trapping fox. And then I read a scientific book on fox, and it was amazing how much information overlapped because this trapper knew fox. He knew their behavior. And so the same thing can certainly occur with someone who has years of experience with moles who really get into it. And unfortunately, so he would drop these little nuggets, and it just left me hanging saying, how do you know that? What's the evidence for this? And so another example would be, he says, when he talks about fumigants, he says the challenge is that moles will collapse the burrow to block the gas. I've heard that myself. The problem is that I don't know if anyone has evidence to prove that it's true. Has anyone used a fumigant and then dug up the tunnel to see that the mole blocked it? How would we know that? So because fumigation of a long mole tunnel is difficult as it is because it's narrow, it's extensive, and it's hard for gas to move through such a constricted space. It's like breathing through a 10-foot straw, right? That would be hard to do. Think about it. You have to blow all the bad air out, all the good air back in. That would be exhausting, right? So that's what you're trying to do with a fumigant. You're trying to push bad gas through a very long tunnel. So I was a little left hanging, as I will use that phrase again, as I just, oh, please, I wish we had some evidence of that. Now, one of the things he mentions, this is an example of a very positive thing. He talks about the vibrators that are people put in your yard. He said flat out, it doesn't work. Again, there's that first person information that I'm looking for. He says, because he's trapped moles right next to him. Okay, spot on there. That's the kind of information, that anecdotal, experiential information that you want to get from someone who is a master mole trapper, right? That's the kind of stuff you're looking for. So he'll drop some of these things in, but then he'll talk about exclusion. Is it ever possible to exclude moles from someone's yard? And I was a bit confused here. He talks about digging a 1 foot wide trench, 3 feet down. But then he says at the bottom, you only L it out 3 inches. Well, I think there was a typo there. I think he really meant to L it out 1 foot. So, but I don't know, right? So why would you dig a 12-inch wide trench and only have the L of your mesh coming out 3 inches? Well, that's a lot of digging for no reason. Why wouldn't you just dig 3 inches? And do it that way? But you want to go down deep. Is 3 feet enough? I don't know. But I would have loved to have seen if he had experience with this and had success protecting someone's yard. Certainly it would reduce access by moles because it would be a significant barrier. And he does recommend properly that the mesh should extend above the ground, because moles can go across the surface of the ground as well. Probably one of the more interesting chapters that he has is when he talks about the various mole traps. And again, he seems to be very interested in those European designs. And that, for those of you perhaps looking for a different design or a different type of trap, because he does talk about some of the pros and cons of various traps, and he uses tables to describe that. And I found that kind of interesting, and I think those of you that are involved in mole trapping, unfortunately we don't have mole trapping here in Montana. I'd love to go out and try some of these things because we don't have moles. So if I was back in of course Massachusetts, where I'm from, they stupidly banned mole traps, of course, because they work, right? But for those of you that aren't in such stupid states, or states where moles don't occur, I think there's some information in this traps to sort of challenge you and maybe have you change things up, because he talks about the importance of, avoiding lawnmowers. And so you want to have a trap that's going to get the job done, but also avoid lawnmowers, right? So that is kind of interesting in terms of what I found there. The guts of the book are in his when he talks about his trapping, the details, his particular trapping system. And before I get there, his number one trap, if I've read him correctly, is the Talpex. It's Talpex, the Talpex trap. Let me see if I can pull up a picture of it here for you. As I get a Talpex mole trap, here it is. So this is this is the trap that he likes. If I can, where is it here? I don't see it. Well, he likes these are some of those same types of designs, and you can see that here. But the Talpex mole trap, I don't see it listed here by Amazon, which is kind of interesting. But that seems to be his kind of go-to trap, and it kind of has this, if memory serves, this kind of design that you see here, that scissor type action from the top. And I wish he was a little clearer on the purpose of the blocking mound. I would like to have him give a little bit more detail there. I thought he could have explained that a little bit more. For those of you that are professionals, it'll be like, oh yeah, I know to do that. But for homeowners, I think there could be some confusion about that. And he gets into he talks about the importance of types of equipment, of course, and he also has an interesting section on site selection. And I thought that his information on areas where there's old mole damage or difficult to find mole damage was helpful. And for those of you that need a kind of little refresher on the more difficult sites to find moles, that would be, I thought, helpful in this particular book. Now, an interesting aspect of his book is that he actually has a series of videos that are accessed through QR codes in the book. And these are videos that he has up on YouTube, but you only can access them if you know the direct link. So that was kind of a clever thing to do. And so it's kind of an interactive type book where you have the book in your hand and then you use your QR code to go to the particular YouTube page, and then he has a video explaining this particular element. I think there's a series of 6 of them. Not very long, but certainly can be helpful for those of you that are a little bit more visual in your learning. And then lastly, he gets into some common problems and deals with questions and answers, common problems that can be encountered. And that could be helpful for some of you that have some questions about certain things, and he tries to give a list of those. He kind of concludes the book with a list of, professional mole trappers. I don't know where he got his list from, perhaps a particular Google list. He doesn't seem to be very connected to industry trade groups. Now, he does have a pesticide license from what he said in the book, as I recall. So he does have some knowledge in the pest control industry, but why he didn't know more about various, trapping associations and that sort of thing, I was a little lost on that, wondering why. So this is one of the challenges, of course, with wildlife control, is that we tend to be very insular. We, I'm not saying this is the case for him. Certainly he was insular in the fact that he didn't talk about the industry very much. But, he does have listings of other mole trappers. I don't think he's making any money off those referrals. I think this was just sort of a courtesy to help homeowners obtain someone who is a professional. And he also has listings for how to purchase some of the professional equipment that people would use to control moles. So would this book help you catch moles? I think the answer to that is yes. But it needed, for the professional, he really could have taken the book to another level without a lot of extra work, in my opinion. If he'd had me review it, for example, before he published, we could have really, I think, really provided a lot more technical information that would have made it useful not only for the homeowner, but also we could have marketed it more to the professional as well, or perhaps create a second book for the professional. I would have liked him to delve more deeply into some of the biology of moles, talking about, the eastern mole and the hoary-tailed mole and the star-nosed mole. And, he does touch on them, but he tends to kind of clump things together and just on a side mention some of these other species. And that was, I think, a little unfortunate. It would have been nice to sort of get a little bit more detail in there, not make it a book in and of itself, but to clarify some of that, because there does seem to be different strategies necessary to control a star-nosed mole versus an eastern mole. And if he had experience with that, that would have been great to learn. If he didn't, it would have been helpful to say, hey, the majority of my trapping is on these 2 species. My information really delves with them. And that would have been fair as well, right? That would have been helpful in that regard. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm not doing a screaming endorsement of the book. I think could it be useful for you if you want to get a different perspective on your mole control? He doesn't get into pricing. He doesn't get into the amount of time necessary to do the kind of work, but I do think it can be helpful if you have the time to delve into the book and you're looking for something to sort of challenge yourself from a different perspective. I think it can be helpful. And again, it's only It's only $30, and it's not that high. He does have a Kindle version. Just to point that out for you, he does have a Kindle version. So if those of you that are a little bit more into that type of thing, you can certainly get it that way as well. And so that would certainly be cheaper. But there it is. Modern Mole Trapping, Addressing the Destructive Nature of Moles by Richard M. Huberty for $30. You're going to get it on Amazon. Well, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast system. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and also provide a review if you would. If this is the kind of content you like, we'd love to hear your favorable comments. Also, you can reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail. That's at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your criticisms, your suggestions, perhaps things for new shows. Perhaps you want to be on the show. Would definitely love to hear from you. And then lastly, you can find my podcast as well on Rumble. Just go to Wildlife Control Consultant there, and you can pick up my podcast there as well. This is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.